Good afternoon, everybody. I would first like to place on record my compliments to the Vice Chancellor and Professor Aneja, who has taken, time out to launch this webinar and to understand and comprehend the difficulties that are being faced by the disabled students with specific reference to the visually impaired. I would first like to tell you that we have 21 categories of disabilities, and when we look at the broad categorization of disabilities, we would see that the visual impairment and hearing impairment and locomotor disabilities and intellectual and neurological disabilities, also learning disabilities and blood disorders are some of the newer disabilities that have been included in the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. And the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016 that has been passed in Parliament is one of the most illustrative, noble, and one of the very exemplary legislation that seeks to give full human rights to the disabled persons. The fact that this pandemic has literally consumed our lives, and now the world is struggling on how to fight this COVID-19. We anticipated that our disabled persons, disabled students, including the aged, and those in rural areas and in institutions, and women and children, disabled persons would have difficulties, and particularly the visually impaired persons who would be, their life's existence is based on the fact that they would have to touch and feel, whether it's shapes and sizes, whether it is their pathway, whether it is by a sense of touch that they would need to feel their environment. We felt that the disabled persons would be more prone and vulnerable to infection, given that the infection is a droplet which can be found on surfaces, which can be found on plastics, on papers, on doorknobs, on any kind of structure. So we needed to see that the disabled persons must be taken care of, and their lives are very precious, very important. So we issued a circular and we wrote to all these chief secretaries of the state governments to request them to ensure that special care needs to be taken of the disabled persons during these times of pandemic. Soon, on the basis of our request, the Department of Personnel and Training gave exemption of disabled persons to attend office physically and to stay at home and continue their work online and to work from home. I do agree that some of them, particularly the banking organizations, finds it difficult to let the disabled persons work from home. But since the exemption is a blanket exemption, we are trying to take up with the concerned departments to ensure that the exemption should not come in the way of their getting their salary. And if they have worked from home and if they are able to contribute, I think their staying at home and being safe is more important. So the exemption which has been provided by the DOPT is one of the circulars which has been uploaded on our websites, are letters to the chief secretaries of state governments requesting them to also issue e-passes for the highly dependent disabled persons for whom caregiving is an essential part of their existence, where a caregiver would need to come bathe the child, change his clothes, give him his food and medicine. We realize that people with sensory impairment, people who have difficulties should not have sort of any disruption of the caregiving service. So accordingly, we took it up with Home Ministry, and we also took it up with the state governments. We also ensured that since most of the persons would not be able to access the highest offices, so the state disability commissioners, who are the quasi-judicial and policy-making bodies, who need to take suo motu cognizance of any violations or any inconvenience, were sort of activated. And we are very thankful to the entire fraternity of state disability commissioners who have come forward, shared their phone numbers, shared their information online to ensure that. I would also like to sort of give you an example. A disabled intellectual child was reported missing, and he was somewhere found in Punjab, in Amritsar, and his parents are staying here in Mayur Vihar, Delhi. We were able to recover that child on the basis of this State Disability Commissioners Network. And I would especially like to thank all the State Disability Commissioners and the civil society organization, the NGOs and the parents organization, who have been able to help us streamline the entire process of e-passes, and also to see that data which is shared by the unique identification portal in the district, and the district collector, who would be the nodal sort of officer to verify the genuine and authenticity of the need for caregiving or the need for e-passes of the disabled persons, are all shared, and the custodian of the data, whether it is the State Disability Commissioner or the District Welfare Officer or the District Collector, are all working in concert to ensure that there is no inconvenience. We also, in the initial sort of stage itself, we realized that most of the news instructions, including the Honorable Prime Minister's speeches and meetings with public representatives and or the chief ministers, also must be sort of disseminated in accessible format, either through the sign language interpretation and the text to speech or the braille sort of formats. And we've found that most of the states have been able to translate the information in their regional languages, and uniform format of sign language has been adhered to. And particularly with regard to COVID news, we have tried to see that every aspect of the news, every aspect of the instructions and the lockdown period, this instructions regarding washing of hands, staying at home, being safe, and also to ensure that what kind of existential and psychological care support that would be required, those also have been addressed. And through our institutes, whether it's the National Institute for the Visually Impaired or the National Institute for the Intellectually Disabled and the National Institutes for Multiple Disabled or the Locomotor Disabled Institute, we are trying to see that helplines for psychological support are provided for, and disabled children are able to access these helplines and seek guidance on certain stress situations and certain sort of questions which they would like to ask. We have also ensured that rehabilitative care for children between 0 to 6 years, which is that early intervention care, where the entire gamut of multisensory and cognitive and motor skill development exercises that needed to be continued in the institutions should be a sort of simplified and home-based continuity of those exercises which are important for the child's growth and development, must also be made into a video format and simple instructions, easy to follow guidelines must be prepared. So we've tried our best to see that during the lockdown period, the rehabilitative care, the rights of the persons with disabilities, accessible format of news and information, and also ensuring that their caregiving services must not be discontinued. Those guidelines have comprehensively addressed, and they are all on our DEPwD Government of India website. But with regard to continuity of education, and particularly higher education, where this webinar is likely to address, and some technical sessions I believe have been organized, I would like to sort of say that this is going to be our way of life, and we should try to see that the online format of learning must be crystallized, must be made more sort of accessible, and such instructions, such teaching, whether by way of accompanying them with PowerPoint presentations and books that are text to speech, or braille sort of libraries that are commensurate with the teaching, and the entire organizing the schedule and the seminars and the syllabus in congruity, I think is a challenge which is going to be facing us. But I think it would save us that much of travel time, and most of our infrastructure that are not accessible, and which inconveniences the disabled persons can be overcome by staying at home and learning your lessons and your carrying on with your academic schedule online. It's a great effort that the Delhi University has made, and I'm sure that this needs to be replicated in all other universities. We will obviously need to take the help of some experts on how to develop the courses, how to sort of see that the fine tuning is done, how to ensure that the entire accessible formats of text to speech, closed captioning, sign language interpretation, and accessible sort of monitors, accessible computers, smartphones, accessible libraries like the Braille, Sugamya library, and accessible sort of physical environment. All these universal accessibility features are coming in very useful now, and the more we are trying to sort of see that our lives must carry on, and home-based studies, home-based exercise, home-based sort of work in case of online working from home, all these are going to be a very sort of our routine, and something which will be inherent in our lives for the future, and also for the fact that we are fighting the fact that we get infected if we go out, and if there's too much community, and if we are more than sort of 5 people, there's a possibility that we would get infected. But here, if we're staying at home, but we are able to sort of get onto the online and get onto the webinar for seminar and discussions, and still continue the intellectual academic pursuits that we need to develop as a society and as a community, I think we would be doing a great service to the students, to ourselves, and to the entire academic fraternity. So it's a challenge we must all address, but I would say that we have also in our government offices adopted these webinars and the online way of talking to each other, but work is carrying on. So similarly, if such mediums by way of which you can carry on with your academic schedule and rather make it much more accessible for disabled students, it will do them a lot of good. And I hope if there are any sort of technology interventions that need to be sort of done by way of which it can be more fine-tuned, and it would be sort of better in terms of magnification of the teaching sort of content, and also by way of which accessibility and the entire translation of the knowledge and information to the person, so that he is able to get the entire knowledge and information without much difficulty. So let me once again thank the faculty, the Vice Chancellor and Professor Aneja for having invited us for this participating in the webinar. We wish you a great success and we wish you a very constructive discussion in your technical seminars, and we hope to be apprised of what are the kind of discussions and the suggestions that come out in the technical sessions. I would like my Joint Secretary Policy, Mr. Prabodh Seth, to also participate in this discussion and share with you certain policy matters and the legal capacity and the the accessibility issues that are there in our Act, and by way of understanding how to move forward and how to make it more useful for human society is what we should need to look at. Thank you very much.
Vice Chancellor, Delhi University, Professor Aneja from Delhi University, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, persons with visual disabilities, a very good evening to you all. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Aneja and Delhi University for inviting me to this webinar. When I came to know about it, I immediately decided to be a part of it since it deals with a very important topic. As we all know, we are in the grip of a pandemic known as COVID-19. The Department of Empowerment of Persons with Disabilities has undertaken a number of measures to cope with COVID pandemic. A number of guidelines have been issued known as the Comprehensive Disability Inclusive Guidelines for Persons with Disabilities. We've also written to Chief Secretaries, to Secretary Information and Broadcasting, Secretary Health, and Secretary Home regarding various issues concerning persons with disabilities. While we are trying our best to issue various guidelines and also see to it that these guidelines are properly implemented, I would also like to brief you about some of the initiatives which we have taken in the Department of Empowerment of Persons with Disabilities. When we talk of the initiatives, we start with right from the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, which was passed in the year 2016 and which was implemented from the year 2017. This Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act increased the number of disabilities from 7 to 21. And in the 21 categories of disabilities, we have persons with visual impairment as well as persons with low vision. A very important segment of this Act is concerning accessibility, where sections 40 to 46 deal with various measures for ensuring accessibility. When you talk of accessibility, you have accessibility of built-in environment, accessibility of transport and communication, and accessibility of information and communication technology. We have also got provisions for inclusive education for all persons with disabilities. As regards persons with visual disabilities, which includes both visual impairment as well as persons with low vision, 1% of jobs in various government establishments are reserved for such category of persons. This is given in the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. When we move from the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act and talk about other initiatives which the Department of Empowerment of Persons with Disabilities has undertaken, the first and foremost thing which comes to our mind is the Accessible India campaign, which emphasizes the importance of accessibility and which has certain provisions for persons with visual disabilities. As per the Act, the persons with visual disabilities have to be provided information in braille and audible tapes. In the Accessible India campaign, we have given various measures which need to be introduced in order to make physical environment accessible. We have another scheme for persons with disabilities which provides for aids and assistive devices. This is known as the Assistance to Disabled Persons for Purchase and Fitting of Aids and Appliances. This is a very old scheme which underwent transformation in the year 2014 when we changed and modified the number of aids and assistive devices to be provided to persons with disabilities. We included a number of modern aids and assistive devices to be distributed amongst persons with disabilities. For persons with visual disabilities, there is a very important device known as Smart Cane, which we started distributing to persons with disabilities consequent upon the amendment in the scheme known as DEP. Apart from this scheme, we have another scheme where we provide scholarships to persons with disabilities, which includes persons with visual disabilities, right from the pre-matric scholarship, which gives scholarship to disabled persons up to for classes 9th and 10th. We have the post-matric scholarship for classes 11th onwards, and then we have top class scholarship, which gives scholarship to persons with disabilities in certain notified institutes of excellence. We have the skill training program where we provide skilling to persons with disabilities. And here the objective is economic empowerment of persons with disabilities. So what I want to tell everyone sitting here is that our department is in fact trying our best to empower persons with disabilities in all possible ways, whether it is physical empowerment through the assistance to disabled persons for purchase and fitting of aids and assistive devices, their educational empowerment in terms of various scholarships which are provided to students with disabilities, and National Action Plan for Skill Development for economic empowerment of Divyangjan. Now, apart from these initiatives, we have issued guidelines so that during COVID and pandemic, persons with disabilities do not suffer and they get the best possible treatment. Some of the important guidelines include provision of water, food, medicines, then making persons dealing with PWDs sensitive to their rights, providing e-passes to the caregivers and maids of persons with disabilities, providing information relating to COVID pandemic in accessible format, and also providing facilities to sign language interpreters who are rendering their services at important places where some persons with disabilities are staying. The purpose of all these provisions and guidelines is to enable persons with disabilities cope with the COVID pandemic like any other individual and do not face any added problems and difficulties during this pandemic. I think I have just given you a brief account of all these measures which our department has undertaken for persons with disabilities and also for persons with disabilities during this COVID pandemic. I think with all these measures, we are trying our best to ensure that persons with disabilities, the Delhi University and its faculty for having organized such an important webinar during this COVID pandemic for persons with disabilities. I wish all success to this webinar, and with these words I wish all the best to the webinar and also to all the organizers of this important event. Thank you.